Hey, what's up, guys? Hello, so Football Talk here. As I have done the last 7 years now, and as the actual reason I started with my page, I've put together my personal list of the NFL Top 100. This was originally designed to be a ranking of the top 100 players in the league, regardless of position, for the upcoming season. And while this has become more and more a comparison of resumes and altered its criteria, in the spirit of what this was intended to be, I listed what I thought were the very best players in relation to how good they are at their respective position coming into 2021. What I changed this year was actually put in ratings on these players, sort of Madden style, and one by one incorporating them into the list while debating back and forth when multiple guys shared the same number. There are 6 names to start off with who didn't qualify for my list. I believe they all deserve to be on it, but I just didn't know where to put them because of how long it's been since we've seen them on the field, how often they've gotten hurt recently, or because we just don't know if or when we will see them play again. I also listed the 30 names that just missed the cut, so it's almost a top 130 because I always have a tough time leaving those names off, but I feel pretty good about the ultimate rankings that I put together here. The official countdown premieres 5 days from now when this video comes out, but I'm filming this already on August 4th, just in case any players were to suffer an injury or some other news coming out that would change the availability of certain players. Just bear that in mind if anything were to come up. And with that, let's talk about a couple of guys who didn't qualify for my list. First up with Michael Thomas, the Saints receiver. The news came out a couple of weeks ago. No idea we had foot surgery in late July. There's just uncertainty there when he's actually going to dress up. And I wouldn't put anybody on the list if they missed half the season, which apparently is a possibility. Obviously, if he's totally healthy, he's going to be in the list and he's probably going to be pretty high up, even though he had a down season last year when he was banged up and already had that foot sprain or whatever it was exactly. In 2019, setting the single season reception record. So physical, a consistent chain mover. Just the uncertainty with him. Derwin James, next name up here, only 5 total games played over the last 2 years combined. Has the tools to be the best safety in the entire league when totally healthy, and if he can just keep going that way, I believe he'll be an incredible player for the Brandon Staley defense. I just hope that he's finally going to be able to stay out there on the field. Odell Beckham Jr., another guy who's just been banged up constantly, even when he was available at times before tearing his ACL last year, played in just 25 total games over his last 4 years combined, but has the ability to be an absolute game breaker, and we saw some flashes of that in 2020. The whole notion about the Browns offense being better without him is just ridiculous because people need to realize this Kevin Stefanski playbook. All the players still needed to really learn it, get all the details down before they could really get going. And that's just a misconception by a lot of people who hear it out there in the media. All those unqualified statements, I want to call them. Then with Danielle Hunter, the Vikings defensive end, I just don't know about his status in 2021. He had a scary back surgery before last season even started. And did not just rework his contract, it appears that he'll be good to go. But that's just something that I want to see first. In 2019, he was like a top 7 or 8 defensive end in the league. But we'll have to see how much it slows him down, if he is even totally healthy. I'm just not ready to put him up there, because he would obviously be in the top 50 range for me otherwise. Then with Mitchell Schwartz, who's currently still a free agent, and he has hinted at the possible retirement to the Kansas City media last year. And at this point, it seems like the logical way that this will go. He missed pretty much all of 2020, but the season before that, he was clearly one of the top 3 right tackles in the league. Then Deshaun Watson for obvious reasons. We don't know if he'll be allowed to play, where he might end up, or whatever it may be. When on the field, he's a top 15 player in the league, and there's really not much discussion to be had there. We'll just have to see how this whole thing plays out. And with that, let's just quickly look at the names that came very close to making my list here. So I'm cheating a little bit here, I know. There's a bunch of offensive linemen in this group, like Brandon Brooks of the Eagles, who was a top 3 guard in the league in 2019, that missed all of last season with a torn Achilles, I believe. I just want to see how he bounces back first before I put him on the list again. Elton Jenkins also for the Packers, excellent guard, has really boosted that zone run game for Green Bay. Joel Bitonio, one of the Browns linemen that actually didn't quite make the cut, but he's been doing it for several years now. In the run and pass game, very balanced. Garrett Bowles, the left tackle of the Broncos, looked like kind of a first-round bust early on, but really worked on his technique. And then last season fixed some of the holding calls that had really bothered him for most of his career. Jason Kelsey, who was the best center in the league for like a 5-year stretch. He's starting to slow down a little bit, but still an excellent player. Joe Thuney, now of the Chiefs, coming over from New England, where he was a dominant run blocker and was paid like one of the top linemen in the league. Taylor Lewan, left tackle for the Titans, one of the most aggressive offensive tackles in the game, really gets after it in the run game, and then has those claws in pass pro where he can control reps. Missed more than half of last season with a torn ACL, I believe. Hopefully he can bounce back properly. And JC Tretter, also of the Browns, just missing the cut here. Excellent pass protector and does a great job of working up to the second level. Teron Armstead, the left tackle for the Saints, who has been one of the top pass protecting tackles in the entire league. But you just know every single year he's going to miss a few games. Roger Saffold of the Titans. I recently heard Sean McVay and one of his former assistants in Matt LaFleur, and obviously the Packers head coach, talk about him being one of the more underrated players in the entire league. And I'd agree with that statement. Probably playing his best football now in Tennessee. Orlando Brown, also now of the Chiefs, coming over from Baltimore in exchange for a first-round pick, is going to play left tackle for a full season for the first time in his career, after switching midway through last year for the Ravens to make up that hole left by Ronnie Stanley. Really a hulking tackle who's going to get after in the run game. And as long as you don't ask him to stay with guys in pass pro for forever, he's going to get the job done there as well, just because guys will have a tough time getting around or through him. And finally, Ryan Kelly of the Colts, who's knocking on being one of the top 5 centers in the league. Some of the best combo blocks that you'll see down there in Indy with those two guards there. Also, quite a few safeties when you look at Kevin Byard for the Titans, who has been dropping off a little bit these last 2 years, was close to the top 50 player for me still in 2020. His ball production has certainly fallen off as well with just one interception last season, but still a very versatile piece on the back end for Tennessee. Marcus May of the Jets, where it's really between him and Quentin Williams as the top 2 players for the Jets defense. Great range and playmaking ability as a deep defender. Jordan Poyer, and for that matter you can also put Micah Hyde up here of the Bills. One of the best safety tandems that is rarely discussed. Poyer had the better 2020 season, so I thought he would deserve to be up here since Hyde has been a frequent visitor at least to this just outside guys. And I think he deserves some credit here. Harrison Smith of the Vikings, somebody who has been doing it for a long time. Maybe a little bit of a physical decline is starting to happen with him, although his game is very much about how physical a player he is. Still one of the top edge setters in the run game, just with him not having Anthony Harris there now, who provided great range alongside him. We'll see how exactly his role changes. A couple of running backs here, Joe Mixon, one of the more underrated guys at his position, really just an all-around player, whether it's executing different run schemes, being a versatile receiver, and protecting his quarterback. He can get the job done in any facet. Unfortunately, just hasn't been able to stay healthy these last 2 years. And Josh Jacobs of the Raiders, who I thought should have been the offensive rookie of the year back against Kyler Murray in 2019. Started last season off very strong as well, but just slowed down a little bit with some bruises that came along with him. Now to bring in Kenyon Drake. How exactly do they split touches? I still believe that Jacobs has star potential. As far as corners go, Marcus Peters of the Ravens, the premier playmaking corner outside of Xavier Howard for the Dolphins, will get burned every once in a while, but makes up for it with some big plays defensively. Jason Verrett for the 49ers, really glad to see him finally bounce back after he just could not stay on the field for like a 4 or 5 year period. He was a top 10 corner in the league, I thought, last season, and I just hope that he can keep that going. Marshall Latimer for the Saints, another guy really bright early on. His rookie season, it looked like he's gonna be a top 3 or 4 corner in the league soon. Just hasn't really happened. Has been falling off a little bit recently, but I still believe has the physical tools to become the true number 1 shutdown corner. And he is challenged a lot of times with the opposing team's number 1 receiver and is confident enough to take on those matchups. Plus then finally Mike Hilton, to me the top slot corner in the entire league, whether it's as a blitzer, shallow zone coverage, mirroring guys in the slot one-on-one. He can get the job done, whatever you ask from him. The only quarterback among these 30 names actually is Derek Carr, who was knocking the status of being a top 10 quarterback in the league last season, I thought. What I really appreciate about him, finally trying to push the ball down the field again, making those big plays, which really lacked for a few years, where he was hyper-conservative, and it actually hurt his team in terms of not being able to push the ball past that first down marker. He deserves some credit here. And then as far as the defensive line goes, really more of an outside linebacker actually, Bradley Chubb of the Broncos. Had an excellent rookie showing, then missed all of his second season when he was poised to kind of break out after what I saw from the preseason from him. But then this year, started again slow without Von Miller, but then started to come into his own and really take over some games. So it'll be fun with him and Vaughn on opposite edges this season. the kind of havoc that they can create. You look at Trey Hendrickson as well, kind of similar for the Saints. That's kind of the Robin to Cam Jordan. But you can definitely argue that Hendrickson outplayed Jordan last season, which was kind of unexpected because they invested a first-round pick in Marcus Davenport a few years ago. But Hendrickson, excellent technique, great effort, and he deserves that big contract now with the Bengals. Akeem Hicks for the Bears missed most of 2019. Last season was fighting through some injuries even when he was out there on the field. But you can tell the difference between being out there for Chicago and not. That defensive front completely changes in my opinion. Just somebody who's going to be tough to move in the run game, and as a pass rusher can just drive centers or guards back into the quarterback's lap. In that same division, Kenny Clark for the Packers, one of the premier nose tackles in the game, actually fairly productive as a pass rusher at that nose position, and in the run game can really swallow up double teams and free his teammates. He just needs more pursuit from those guys around him to actually take advantage of those opportunities. DeMarcus Lawrence of the Cowboys, someone who's really hot and cold, I believe. His highs are pretty damn high, where he can have those free sack performances every once in a while. But then there's also games where he just doesn't really show up, it feels like. So I wasn't ready to put him on the list. And then Vita Vea of the Bucks, who broke his foot early on last season and then came back for the playoffs to be his usual dominant self again. Just somebody who's not going to be moved in the middle of that defense. Great athleticism for such a big guy. Can stay on the field for third downs because he does provide enough as a pass rusher. And I just want to see it now for a full season at that level. Show me that and you're on the list. And then finally, those two guys in Washington, Jonathan Allen and Deron Payne, with Allen being more of a chaos player who gets up the field and causes problems, while Payne is somebody who can anchor against double teams and not allow any movement at the point of attack in the run game. But you put those guys in one gap and let them get upfield, they can definitely wreak havoc. And that about covers those 30 names. But now let's get into the actual list, starting with numbers 100 to 91. And we're always going to go bottom to top here, because that way it makes most sense when we get to the top 10 at the end, since I'll have a slide for every single player. So just stay with me here. And with that final spot, with John Johnson III, formerly of the Rams, now he's going to play for the Browns. And he's one of the most complete safeties in the league. The stats will never quite be as impressive, but he can do basically anything asked of him in the split safety heavy defense that he played in LA, playing the high post, dropping down into the box, covering in the slot, and just being a very reliable tackler. Just ahead of him, we have an up-and-coming tight end from Detroit in T.J. Hawkinson, who's looking to knock onto that elite tier soon, while far behind Travis Kelce and Darren Waller. He was third in receiving yards among tight ends last season with over 700, and he was an outstanding run blocker already coming out of Iowa as the highest graded tight end prospect for me until Kyle Pitts came along this year. And right ahead of him, we have another Brown and Denzel Ward cornerback. His rookie season in 2018 is still the most impressive one of his career, I would say, statistically, but he has turned himself into somebody who can consistently take on the opposing number one's option in the pass game, unless it's Travis Kelce, who I just talked about, in the divisional round game. And Ward was tied for second in the league with 18 pass breakups last season. At 97, we have Ryan Tannehill. We all know the Titans often runs through Derrick Henry, and Tannehill's receiver duo should be even better now with Julio Jones being added to the mix. But Tannehill's numbers over these last 2 years are right up there with Mahomes, Rodgers, and others, consistently providing big plays. And whenever the defense is too eager on stopping Derrick Henry and they send like 8 guys to go with him, he can easily keep the ball around the edge and rip off big plays. Right ahead of him with Deion Jones, still one of the more underrated linebackers in the league for Atlanta. Incredible in the pass game, 11 career interceptions in 5 years, took 5 of those back to the house, 38 more passes broken up, also 38 tackles for loss, and has that true sideline-to-sideline range, while being able to get around blockers and not get punished for his size. At 95 with Jeffrey Simmons, the guy who was on my cover photo for young defensive players poised to break out ahead of last season, and he was a physically dominant run defender for the Titans last season, can drive guys back onto the quarterback's lap as well, but also freakish ability to contort his body and still getting more efficient with his hands, so I think he's going to be a force for that unit. At 94, the Bears' Cody Whitehair, whether you put him at center or guard, he's an elite run blocker, less than 2 sacks allowed per season, only 2 combined holding penalties over these last 3 years, and his 2 games missed this past season were the only ones so far of his career, so a super dependable player that always excels for Chicago. And then we have tight end Mark Andrews, the number one option in the pass game for the Ravens basically since Lamar took over at quarterback for them 2.5 years ago. Over 1,500 yards and 17 touchdowns since the start of 2019. A real threat down the seams, extends outside his frame well, and is a weapon in the red zone. Next up, Matt Stafford, a guy who I've always thought saw his talent wasted in Detroit, and now we finally see what he can do with great players and coaches around him in LA, when he rarely even had competent ones for most of his career. He has some of the most prolific passing performances in NFL history, but it's his physical talent, the playmaking ability, and the toughness that have always impressed me. And the final guy of this group, Jack Conklin, the offensive tackle, coming over to Cleveland from Tennessee in free agency last year after the Titans declined his 5th-year option. Since he had fallen off a bit from a Pro Bowl rookie season, last year he was a first-team All-Pro as arguably the top guy among what I believe will be the best offensive line in the NFL in 2021. Just a really complete, rock-solid player all around. And that brings us to our next group, 90 to 81. And we're starting with Tristan Wirfs, because as good as Conklin was last season, this Bucs rookie was right on par with him, and he has better physical upsides than pretty much any other tackle in the league for that matter, which should allow him to be even better in year 2. Wirfs has an explosive lower body that he displays in the run game, and he quickly fixed some of the flaws in pass pro that he showed in college, which is why I actually thought he would start at guard, but that transition for him wasn't a hard one at all, it seemed like. And then at 89, James Bradbury always has been a solid player in Carolina, but really turned himself into one of the better corners in the league with a lot of man coverage responsibility in Big Blue's defense. He actually had almost identical numbers to Denzel Ward, who had 9 spots lower, but I thought proved himself in tougher matchups. Just ahead of him I have another Giant, who I among others was a little surprised to see franchise tag last year, but he certainly repaid New York's belief in him and earned another tag. Williams recorded 14 tackles for loss, 11.5 sacks, and 30 more hits on the quarterback, as the G-Men's number one disruptor last season, and really the only one, along with several big bodies up front. At 87, Miles Jack, arguably the most underrated linebacker among fans, just because nobody ever seems to talk about him. Jack can deal with blocks well, he has great range, and what really stood out to me last season was his ability to erase tight ends in the pass game, also flexing out wide with them, and not allowing mismatches to happen. He was out for a couple of games last year, but he only missed 6.3% of his tackling attempts. Now we get to the second and final player of the Lions here in Frank Ragnow, the center, who to me has already become one of the top 3 players at his position in the league in just his 3rd year. Just so crafty for a young player already, with the way that he can put his body in the way of pursuit defenders, how he releases on screens and stuff like that. He has the power to create movement at the point of attack and anchor against nose tackles, but he really excels in communicating and keeping those A-gaps clean for his quarterback. At 85 now, certainly has fallen off a bit here in Cam Jordan, who has been one of the top defensive ends in the league over the last 5 years or so, finding himself inside my top 50 in most of them, with a very complete skill set, stopping the run, winning with his hands, and driving offensive tackles backwards as one of the great power rushers in the game, while also excelling when sliding inside in sub packages. I just thought last season Trey Hendrickson, who I talked about a little while ago, actually had a better year, and he's starting to get to the back end of his career. And we stick with the big guys because next up is Wyatt Teller, the Browns guard, who emerged as one of the most dominant run blocking guards in the league last season and finished as a 2nd-team All-Pro. I really liked him coming out of Virginia Tech 3 years ago, and Buffalo made a quick profit on him, so to speak, turning his 7th round pick into 2 out of day 3 picks following his rookie season. But Cleveland now look like the clear winners of this deal, because of the way that Teller has been blowing open holes for Nick Chubb and Kareem Hunt, while also being a certainly above average pass protector. At 83, Terry McLaurin, who to me is right on the fringe of being the top 10 wide receiver in the league, and the best guy in the NFC East actually, I thought, over Amari Cooper and now Kenny Galladay coming in, he would be my number 1 choice. Last year he recorded over 1,100 receiving yards with Dwayne Haskins, Kyle Allen, and Alex Smith throwing him the ball. He can go over the top, he can make big plays with the ball in his hands, and last year he had one of the best hustle plays of the season, outside of that DK Metcalf one everybody seems to remember, when he chased down the Cowboys' Jalen Smith, I believe, on Thanksgiving. Really an emerging superstar player. And just ahead of him, Eddie Jackson, a guy that was in the top half of my list a year ago, and was even better as a Defensive Player of the Year candidate the year prior to that, as the Bears safety. This guy has tremendous range and understanding of schemes, and knack for making big plays, and he has played closer around the line of scrimmage in the last 2 years, were needed due to not having a safety to complement his skill set better. He certainly did drop off in 2020, however, and he has to become a more reliable tackler for them. And finally, the guy that you see the picture of here, Quinnen Williams, who was my number one overall prospect in the 2018 draft, ahead of guys like Nick Bosa and Kyler Murray. And while he didn't have the fastest start or best situation in New York, he has become a force on the Jets D-line. He has outstanding block recognition, is very fluid with his hands and hips, can basically play any technique, and is tough to slow down on his way to the passer. He's gonna be one of the most dominant players in the NFL for future years. Which brings us to our next group here, 80-71, starting with Allen Robinson, the Bears receiver. He hasn't received the recognition he deserves since arriving in Chicago, but it's finally starting to change for A-Rob. He has racked up 2,400 yards and 13 touchdowns his last 2 years combined, despite having arguably the worst quarterback play in the NFL and one of the least exciting offenses overall. But he's very elusive off the line for his size, uses his body well, catches basically everything thrown his way, and just gets the job done quietly. At 79, the reigning Defensive Rookie of the Year, Chase Young, and while he didn't have quite as impressive a debut campaign as Nick Bosa did the year prior, also coming out of Ohio State, and the numbers don't really match up, you can tell that this guy will be a star. He looks like an alien, has shown excellent development since we first saw him burst onto the scene as a sophomore in college, and with 7 combined fumbles forced and recovered, you can tell that he has a knack for that aspect of the game. However, I put a veteran defensive lineman ahead of him and probably been the biggest human on this entire list in Calais Campbell, who has been a great player in 3 different locations now. Baltimore is probably his last stint in terms of places where he'll be worthy of making a spot on this list, and he doesn't have the type of pass rushers around him like he did in Jacksonville, but he is still a beast in the middle of that Ravens defense. His sack total has dropped off each of the last 3 years, but he's still capable of taking over games, and it's almost impossible to move on the inside for them. At 77, Dwayne Brown, entering year 14 in the league, you wouldn't expect a guy like him to be on the list probably, because his prime was arguably between 2012 and 2017, which is also when he last made the Pro Bowl. But in terms of a pure pass protector, it's arguably David Bakhtiari as the only clear guy ahead of him. Over the last 7 years, he's allowed 1 or 0 sacks in all but one of them. Next up, 2 edge rushers who were both in the top 25 a year ago, but are now coming off major injuries and are in an advanced stage, I would say. Starting with Chandler Jones, who will turn 32 this upcoming season, and there's even less clarity around him because of the apparent trade request. But if not for a half-sack more by Shaq Barrett in 2019, he would have led the league in sacks in 2 of the 3 years prior. And then Von Miller, who it's even longer now since we've seen him be at the very top of the edge class, but he has recorded double-digit sacks every year of his career if he played at least as many games. And he's a more complete player, I would say, in terms of creating negative plays in the run game or carrying guys down the field at times as a coverage defender. Now with him and Bradley Chubb hopefully healthy together, this Denver duo could be a terror for offenses. Somebody who has turned himself into somebody capable of shutting down guys like that is the only Texans player on this list, since I already explained that Deshaun wasn't eligible for it, in Laramie Tunsil, who was one of the top 2 prospects in the 2016 draft to go along with Jalen Ramsey for me. And while he isn't quite there, he's on his way of becoming the very best at his position, thanks to working on his technique and avoiding holding calls. False start are still a major issue, however, for him, and Miami still had Houston's assets from the trade until just now. One of the elite centers in the game today now resides in Arizona in Rodney Hudson, whose track record as a pass protector is absolutely stupid, with 2 allowed since 2016 according to my sources. However, he's also great at getting out in front and isolating on linebackers in the run game, and works well on screens. The Raiders completely decimated the offensive line, and the Cardinals now will reap the benefits of fixing one of the biggest holes with a top 2 player at his position. What a rookie season it was for Justin Herbert, who broke pretty much every single passing record for a rookie imaginable, despite not having started the season opener, and being notified of his first career start mere minutes before kickoff. And while he did have Keenan Allen, most of his skill position players were banged up throughout the year, while the pass protection broke down on several occasions. Now with 3 new and much better starters up front, and infinitely better game-managing coaches, expect this start to rise even more. And that's coming from somebody who doubted his ability to adapt to the NFL because of how limited he was used at Oregon. And finally, Calvin Ridley. This guy really showed out and proved that he can be a true number 1 option for Atlanta. Sure, Ridley would have benefited from remaining the best 2 in the game, but you look at the numbers in games without Julio Jones, He averages 107 yards per game. He was my clear wide receiver 1 back in this draft class because I saw somebody who naturally found ways to set up defenders and create separation, which he has carried over beautifully to the NFL. Let's move on to the next slide. At number 70, the Mario Davis. There's a lot of really good linebackers in the NFC, old and young, so it's not easy to always identify who the best ones are. But after being a rather unheralded player to start his career with the Jets, David has been one of the very best at his position his 3 years in New Orleans, with at least 110 tackles, double-digit tackles for loss, and 4 sacks per season, while also averaging 7 pass deflections, even though I like him best as a pressure play on passing downs. And oh baby, what a rookie year it was for Justin Jefferson. Sure, Justin Herbert was incredible and would most likely go number 1 overall in the redraft, but I can promise you that Jefferson would not have been the 5th wide receiver selected, certainly not after Jalen Reagor. It was disrespectful for him to not even earn a single Rookie of the Year vote after breaking Randy Moss's rookie yardage record with 1,400 and turning about 2/3 of his catches into first downs. Next up, Lavonte David, and there's only a few players in the league that I thought deserved more to finally win a Super Bowl, or almost any big game for that matter, than Lavonte David. I truly believe he's one of the most underappreciated players of this generation and has been highly productive since coming into the league, whether it's knifing through as a blitzer, covering backs and tight ends in man, taking on blockers or getting around them in the run game. He's as steady as it gets at the linebacker position, I believe. And then just ahead of him, Brandon Scherff. There's a clear top 3 for offensive guards in the league, I believe. Numbers 1 and 2 are kind of apparent to most people, but to me, Scherff should be somebody who doesn't go unnoticed. He has missed 16 games over the course of a 6-year career in Washington, but he has been a Pro Bowl in each of the last 5, being able to drive guys off the ball and hold opponents to just 1 sack in each of the last 3 years. That's as good a resume as you're going to have outside of the top 2. And at 66, Julio Jones. This is a tough one because Julio was the top receiver on my list just last year, and I feel bad for making the injury argument here, because he did ultimately miss just 4 games over these last 6 years combined, before only playing 9 this past season. But he has been banged up and played at like 80% a lot of the time. This guy's an all-timer, and we have seen him be pretty much unstoppable at times, but I just can't put him any higher because there is reason to hesitate with his injury history in the past. And then there's Dak Prescott, the only player that was limited to just 5 games a year ago, and then actually slightly moved up my list. Dak had some bad moments in 2019 with his ability to keep his eyes down the field and be accurate with the football, but he really ironed those out last season, I thought, even if the sample size was small. He was on pace for over 6,000 yards and made so many big throws, while also being a more confident decision maker. It won't be him, but if anything the defense that will hold Dallas back this season. At 64, Brian Burns. There's quite a few young emerging edge rushers in the NFL, but I don't think people realize how good this guy has been for Carolina already. His 16.5 sacks may not fully represent that, but Burns has racked up an additional 60 pressures on just over 1,100 total snaps. His speed off the edge and ability to bend are top tier, plus he had a few awesome tomahawk strips last season. One of the most fun players to watch in the entire league is Cardinals safety Budda Baker, who finds himself at 63 on my list. His 2 interceptions last season were the only ones of his 4-year career so far, but he's an outstanding edge set in the run game. He's a highly dangerous blitzer from the nickel or depth, and his overall pursuit is second to none. There are some size limitations as a coverage defender, but he won't shy away from any single matchup. Next up, Stephon Tuitt. Pretty much everybody knows TJ Watt and Cam Hayward as the productive players for the Steelers defense, but Stephon Tuitt was arguably as dominant as those 2 in 2020. He recorded 10 tackles for loss, 11 sacks, and 36 additional pressures. As somebody who can consistently make opposing quarterbacks uncomfortable, he can 2-gap blockers or get upfield, and he's a menace on passing downs. And then at 61, we find a guy that made my top 10 last year in Jamal Adams, but has fallen off pretty far from his days in New York, which was somewhat surprising since I'd expect him to only look better as kind of the new Cam Chancellor for the Seahawks defense. However, we didn't see anything similar to the cover-3 heavy approach we were used to from them, as he ran a lot more blitz zero and split safety stuff than in the past, and Adams was exposed to some degree when left 1-on-1 down the field. However, we also got to see him go after the passer quite a bit, as he set a new NFL record with 9.5 sacks in a season for defensive back, despite missing 4 games. So he was very close to the production of a top-tier edge rusher. Taking us to number 60, starting with Eric Kendricks. This is kind of an out of sight, out of mind guy here. In 2019, Kendrick played about as well as any linebacker in the league for Minnesota, with his 12 pass breakups being more than anybody at his position. To go with already having been one of the premier run stoppers in between the tackles. Last season, in 11 games, he picked up 3 passes, and he's only getting better in that area, toggling his eyes between the quarterback and the targets in space in order to put himself into great positions. Moving up one spot from a year ago, Packers running back Aaron Jones had another excellent season, with his highs being higher, but his lows also been a little low, I would say. Over the 30 games these last 2 years, he has just cracked the 3,000 scrimmage yards and 30 touchdowns. He has great burst, contact balance, and speed to pull away from the defense. But he's also a legitimate receiver out wide, who can actually win on go balls down the sideline and stuff like that. AJ Brown at 58, his teammate DK Metcalf is bigger, and a guy like DeAndre Hopkins might have strong hands, but my god, I don't think there's a more physical receiver than AJ Brown. He can throw guys out of his way who try to press him off the line, he dominates at the catch point, and he becomes a load to bring down with the ball in his hands, which was never more apparent than when he ran through like 3 tackles in a critical game late against Baltimore last season. Another guy who has been kind of forgotten by some, but certainly not the offensive tackles he faced during his Defensive Rookie of the Year season, is Nick Bosa of the 49ers. Year 2 lasted 1.5 games for him, but his pressure numbers in 2019 were right up there with the elite edge rushers in the entire league. Bosa is so effective with his hand swipes, and then he can convert speed to power almost equally as well. If the Niners bounce back from the bad injury luck, he could be a Defensive Player of the Year frontrunner. At 56, Cam Hayward, a veteran who has been a force up front for pretty much a decade now for the Steelers. His 4 sacks and 7 tackles for loss last season were the fewest of his last 4 years, and he is certainly starting to slow down a little bit, but he did add 31 more pressures, and had an interception the season opener, and his game has never been about stats, but rather wrecking guards and creating chaos on the interior. Also falling off slightly, Tre'Davious White. I believe more so than ever we saw that there are some limitations with his game. He's an awesome zone corner who can read and play in between patterns, fall off his area to make plays, and take well-calculated risks. He also looks pretty comfortable in off-man coverage against classic outside receivers, but he was put on skates on quite a few occasions when matched up one-on-one with Tyreek Hill in the AFC Championship game, and he loses the dance against some of the more dynamic yak threats. At 54, Grady Jarrett, kinda similar to some other veteran defensive players in the NFC South, who don't get the attention that they deserve, like Demario Davis and Lavonte David who I just talked about. Grady Jarrett has been doing his thing for a long time. He can crash through gaps or backdoor blockers to be disruptive against the run, and he has been one of the more effective pass rushers on the inside, despite rarely having a legitimate second threat for the offensive line to slide towards. One of the biggest injuries last season that I don't think people realize was the Ravens' left tackle Ronnie Stanley. Sure, they found ways to hide their weakness on the other edge after they made Orlando Brown switch sides and started the whole left versus right drama because of how much they rely on the run game, but nobody had more positively graded run blocking snaps in 2019 than Stanley, while also not being responsible for a single sack. He stays right here at number 53, which was unintentional to be honest. Another guy who stays pretty consistent with his ranking, somebody who was a quality contributor for Baltimore still 3 years ago, but has turned himself into an all-pro caliber edge rusher in Green Bay, is Darius Smith. Over these last 2 years, he has combined for 29 tackles for loss, 26 sacks, and 89 extra pressures. The Packers love to move him around on passing downs and create mismatches wherever he lines up, but he's also an underrated run defender, I believe. The second or maybe third name so far of this group to drop down here from the top 10 a year ago is Stephon Gilmore, who came into 2020 as the reigning Defensive Player of the Year. Unfortunately, he missed 5 games due to injuries and COVID protocols, but more importantly, just didn't nearly play at the same level that he did again, as his touchdown to interception ratio went from 0 touchdowns and 6 interceptions to 1-1, and his passer rating surrendered increased by a good 30 points, while the Patriots had another corner who played at a higher level actually. And that moves us into the top half of this list, starting with Kyler Murray at number 50. And through 9 weeks last season, it looked like this guy was headed for a top 20 finish or so, as the Cardinals were 6-3, just coming off that incredible Hail Murray finish, and Kyler looking like the most dangerous dual threat quarterback in the league. What hurt him down the stretch was opponents figuring out how to slow him down to some degree, by sending pressure up the middle and having the guys on the edges go wide to not allow him to get out there. Still, he scored 26 touchdowns through the air and 11 more on the ground, while breaking the back of defenses with his ability to create off-script routinely. He needs more help from Cliff Kingsbury as a play caller, however. Another mainstay in my top 30, Fletcher Cox is moving down the board a little bit here, showing some signs of slowing down recently. He's still nearly impossible to move in the run game, and can take guys for a ride on his way to the passer. Just not quite up there anymore in that second tier, below Aaron Donald. But if you question his impact for the Philly defense, just go back and watch that second Cowboys game, and the difference once Cox had to leave. Pretty consistent with his ranking, since the Saints' right tackle Ryan Ramczyk. He's only the third offensive tackle this year, but Ramczyk was still only responsible for 2 sacks and holding penalties each last season. He's so technically sound, can widen the B gap on the front side or execute cutoffs away from the action, and he's excellent at mirroring what rushers want to do to him, really just trusting his eyes and his technique. After slightly missing out on my list last year, Corey Linsley I thought turned himself into the top center league-wide in 2020. He did miss 3 games, but played at an extremely high level when he was out there. He was already an elite pass protector, but I thought he got even better at transitioning off those combo blocks and opening up holes for Aaron Jones. The Packers decided on the Pro Bowl running back over the premier center in football in terms of paying those guys, and now the Chargers will benefit from it in a major way. At 46, Keenan Allen. Sure, there were 6 other receivers who caught more passes in 2020 than Allen's 100, but on a per-game basis, with 2 contests missed, only Stephon Diggs averaged more receptions per game. He just came short of the 1,000-yard mark, and didn't have as many big plays as some of these other guys did, but he was pretty much unstoppable at times, with his immaculate route running and feel for space to keep the offense moving. Next up, Darren Waller. You have Travis Kelce and George Kittle, who are kind of in a tier of their own, and there's no mystery that those 2 will come up later, but if there was one guy who could theoretically put himself into that tier, as a pure pass catcher at least, it would be Darren Waller, who caught 7 more passes for about 200 more yards than Allen, who I just talked about, while scoring 9 touchdowns. You watch the Saints or the second Chargers game, and nobody seems to be able to hang with this guy. We stick with weapons in the pass game, where we find the most rocked up wide receiver in the NFL. DK Metcalf is an absolute freak from a physique perspective, and questions about his status as the top wide receiver in the 2019 draft, due to some silly free count drill number and resulting narratives, seem almost laughable now. Sure, he might never run 15 different routes in a game, but he's almost unstoppable to stay with on slants, posts and go routes, while having shown a lot of growth in that regard, bouncing off defenders after the catch and being dominant as a run blocker. Darren White at 43 was one of the rising stars defensively coming out of the playoffs. You can argue that he played his position as well as anybody to start the year in 2021, just flying around the field, getting his hands on loose footballs, and delivering some monster hits. His Pro Football Focus grade is astronomically low because of how badly he grades as a coverage defender for them, but I've seen him be able to match dynamic running backs in the pass game one-on-one, and he's most valuable as a pressure player anyway, indicated by 9 sacks last season from the inside linebacker position. Speaking of guys who can provide pressure, very few players have been more consistent at it than Big Brother Bosa. He's had a few nicks and bruises to go with a really odd rookie contract dispute to begin his professional career, but 47.5 sacks in 63 total games will get you paid top of the market money. His signature double-handed swipes and counters off that are deadly, plus what I believe isn't talked about enough is his ability to create negative plays against the run, which shows with 68 tackles for loss so far. And then at 41 with David Bakhtiari. Going name by name here actually reminds me of a clip from last year's official NFL Network rundown, where Bakhtiari and then teammate Brian Bulaga called Bosa the toughest guy to go up against that they had faced last season. And that's saying something, because Bakhtiari hasn't had problems with almost anybody these last 5 years or so, where he has been the premier pass protecting offensive tackle in the league, as PFF's top ranked pass protector in 3 of the last 4, and other than suffering an injury late last year, he hasn't shown any signs of slowing down. Alright, let's get into the top 40, with back-to-back running backs coming off injuries, who were inside my top 15 last year, and I fully expect 2019 Offensive Player of the Year Christian McCaffrey to be a weapon on the ground and through the air once again, capable of 1,000 yards each once more. He can absolutely get the job done between the tackles, but he might be most dangerous as a weapon in the pass game, isolated against linebackers or flexed out wide against defensive backs. I just don't think he has quite the physical talent or breakaway ability as the guy in front of him, where I have Saquon Barkley, and to me this guy is the most gifted back on the planet in my opinion. He hasn't quite reached the same heights as McCaffrey, but Saquon did rack up over 2,000 scrimmage yards as a rookie, and wasn't too far off that per game production in 2019. Last season only lasted 1.5 games for him, and he was held to just 6 yards on 15 carries in his lone full game. But just check out that season opener against the Steelers and the respect that that defense paid him, seemingly blitzing 9 guys at a time to take away any space for him. So far he's run behind one of the worst offensive lines in the league with highly inconsistent quarterback play. Devin White seems to receive all the attention among young linebackers these days, but let's not forget what kind of outstanding season Roquan Smith had in 2020. He just came too short of 100 solo tackles, 18 of those for loss, 4 sacks, 2 interceptions, and 7 more passes deflected. He's become one of the best will linebackers in the game, as somebody who can shoot gaps from the backside and take away easy completions on the short side of the field. He's a screen killer, and maybe the best linebacker in the league in terms of covering tight ends. Maybe the most instinctive player in all of football is Tyrann Mathieu, who is often allowed to throw pretty freely and rob routes over the middle of the field. Plus he can slither through as a blitzer, cover large areas as the quarterback loads up, and brings down bigger bodies with great consistency. He's truly one of those guys who are just tough to figure out where he's going to line up, which manifests itself in 10 interceptions over his last 2 years, but he can also match pretty much anybody in the slot, and has 20 more passes broken up over that stretch. At 36, Zach Martin. Once again, I don't think there's much of an argument here who the top 2 guards in the NFL are. I think their order is pretty killer as well, but Zach Martin certainly has one of the most impressive resumes that you will ever find, as he has been an all-pro player every single year since coming into the league, as a first-team selection 4 of those 6. His power off the snap and leg drive making him an overwhelming run blocker, and his anchor and pass pro is almost unbreakable. This next one, I know is going to be a bit of a controversial one, and alright, I get it. People will say I'm hating on him and not giving the GOAT the credit that he deserves, but I think QB7 is fair for Brady these days. Sure, his resume stands clearly above the rest in NFL history, but let's please not act as if Brady was one of the premier quarterbacks all of last season. He had 2 really bad showings against the Saints to lose a chance for the division title, he threw a game-sealing interception late against the Rams, and 3 picks in the NFC title game. I just want everybody on the Bucs team to get their credit, like an offensive line that dominated down the stretch, a devastating pass rush, and some bad coaching by their opponents. Obviously, Brady is great, especially with his improved pocket elusiveness and ability to push the ball down the field more, which is crazy to say for a 43-year-old. And next up is one of those guys who need to get more credit for the Bucs Super Bowl run. Shaquille Barrett led the league with 19.5 sacks in 2019, and while that number did certainly drop off last season, he was pretty much on par in terms of total pressures, plus then he really turned it on during the postseason. Combining the NFC Championship game and Super Bowl, he recorded 3 tackles for loss, 4 sacks, and 11 more pressures, as somebody who made big play after big play. At 33 we have Nick Chubb, and in terms of pure runners, it's really just Derrick Henry and Chubb I would say at the top of the list. The reason Chubb isn't any higher than this is that he's pretty much limited to just some screens and a dump off every once in a while as a receiver, but this guy's ability to press the front side, keep vision, make subtle adjustments to his running path, and build up power to unleash against poor members of the back 7 is second to none. And nobody closes games quite like this guy, averaging 10 yards per carry in the 4th quarter last season. Just ahead of him with Khalil Mack, and he's not the dominant edge defender that he was a couple of years ago, but Mack is still a badass football player. In terms of setting a physical edge in the run game, you won't find anybody out there better at it. Plus, in the pass game, he has the burst and ability to corner, to force tackles to get into vertical sets, while then having the power to put them on skates for it. We've seen him take over games on several occasions during his career, and there were a couple of instances last year as well that come to mind. And the final group, Jesse Bates. This is a guy that I believe deserves more attention. Bates is the number 3 safety on my list here. He's had 3 interceptions in each of his first 3 years in the league, but he also had 50 more passes broken up last season. This guy has incredible range and ball tracking skills as a center fielder, but also displays a quick trigger and ability to decipher patterns in 2-eye shells. He's by far the most reliable player in the Bengals defense, and he's gotten better every single year. Which moves us into the top 30, starting with Bobby Wagner, who was the top linebacker on the list last year. B-Wags has been doing his thing for a long time now. He was a key piece to Seattle's defensive scheme for years, thanks to his ability to carry number 3 receivers in trips to erase those mismatches, his sturdy frame to bounce off blockers, and his highly reliable tackling. Last year, I thought he looked a little out of place at times, as teams coughed up their Seattle defense, but when he started to call things a little differently, and used him more as a blitzer with a lot of cover 0 and 1, you saw him really shine again. A receiver who's outdone for a bunch of years without competent quarterback play is DeAndre Hopkins. This guy almost fights with corners at the snap, he adjusts his body to the throw, and probably has the strongest hands in the NFL. Kyler Murray quickly built up a strong connection with him, even though Nuke's route tree was very limited. The two reasons there's 3 wide receivers ahead of him, and he moved down a few spots, is that he just doesn't create much separation before the ball comes out, and he didn't offer much dynamic ability after the catch this past season, I thought. After sitting out last season due to some problems with the organization in Washington, and missing a few games the years prior, Trent Williams has moved his name back atop the offensive tackle rankings. As a physically imposing player for the Kyle Shanahan run-heavy offense, this guy can consistently widen the edge in the zone run game, but he's also incredible with his ability to get out in space, while at the same time frustrating edge rushers with having to figure out if they can go around or through him. That's what made him the newly highest paid offensive lineman in the NFL. As for the guy at number 27, over these last 2 years, it's tough to find another safety that produced or played as at high a level as Justin Simmons. With 9 interceptions and 24 more passes broken up, his ball production is second to none, but his all-around skill set is even better. He can limit big plays as a rangy single high free safety, he can drop down into the box and fill against the run, and he can cover tight ends in the slot. I said he could potentially become a great player early on, and I think he deserves that distinction now. That brings us to Derrick. The league's 2-time rushing leader is a throwback to the 80s. With just 75 total catches over his 5-year career, his impact in the pass game is very limited, and we saw it in a couple of games where the Titans were down early and had to put in a different back, but this guy is as close as anything we have today as a workhorse. With 3,567 rushing yards over these last 2 years combined, he easily is first in the league, and it's crazy how he can be such a hammer, but then also the guy to break away from the defense if they can stop him early. At 25, Darius Leonard. Very few linebackers play the game with the kind of passion and energy as the Maniac. Leonard has great closing bursts to chase down ball carriers, he's a dangerous blitzer, and has the athletic ability to stick with smaller guys in pass coverage. I will never forget his game against Baltimore last season, when he consistently brought down Lamar Jackson's space, or forced him to step out of bounds as a spy, as pretty much the only guy that I've ever seen really stick with him one-on-one. And speaking of Lamar, it wasn't quite his MVP season again, and there have always been some limitations with him throwing outside the numbers, but not having any reliable receivers to go with very simplistic passing concepts definitely hurts him. He can be very accurate, especially in the middle, and he's as dangerous a ball carrier as we have in the game today, whether it's keeping the ball around the edge or taking off on scrambles. The demise of the great Lamar Jackson is greatly exaggerated, I just want to say here. Xavier Howard at 23, 10 interceptions are something that we haven't seen in a while. That's why I was surprised to not see Xavier Howard get more love as a Defensive Player of the Year candidate, especially considering his play definitely backed up those. He's only the 4th cornerback on my list, but from his confidence to take on number 1 options, take well-educated guesses, and his ball skills, the X-Men has become one of the premier playmakers on the defensive side of the ball, especially at his position. That brings us to Chris Jones, and I think there clearly is a trio at the top among interior defensive linemen. We can all probably guess who's number 1 among those, but the other 2 are certainly debatable. I have Jones here at 3 because I don't think he's as good a run defender as the rest, especially holding up at the point of attack, because that's just not really his game. However, only Aaron Donald has been as productive as a pass rusher on the inside, with 32 combined sacks and 120 pressures over these last 3 years, and that's with 4 games missed. And then the guy you see pictured here, Dalvin Cook, my 2nd highest ranked running back on the countdown. Nobody has had more explosive plays and games at the position last season than this guy from Minnesota. Plenty of those came against the NFC North teams, including an upset over the Packers, starting a 3-game run for him when he averaged 218 yards per contest. Overall, he racked up over 1,900 yards and 17 touchdowns from scrimmage with 2 games missed. Unfortunately, he also did so the year prior, and there's a little bit more of an injury concern with him than number 1. And we'll see him in a little bit, but let's start with this top 20 here with Russell Wilson. This guy looked like the league MVP over the first half of last season. The Seahawks initially wanted to let Russ cook, but once he had a couple of games with multiple turnovers against more complex defenses, Pete Carroll went back to his old ways of playing more through the run game. Going bombs away with DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett, however, I believe is what makes them most dangerous, and while he has lost some of that magic from the years past, in terms of making those backup type of plays, just because the athleticism is slightly declining, I would say, averaging just under 4,000 yards passing and 140 touchdowns versus 36 interceptions over these last 4 years is up there with the very best. One of the least talked about cornerbacks I believe belongs to that tier at the very top is Baltimore Ravens' Marlon Humphrey. who has been outstanding ever since coming to Baltimore. His completion percentage, yards, and pass rating allowed have all slightly increased over his last 2 years, but he's also reffed up his takeaways, coming up with 6 turnovers and scoring 3 of those in 2019, before leading the league with 8 forced fumbles last season. As a strip specialist, to go with matching against the top wide receivers on the opposing team routinely, a lot of times driving into the slot. And at 18 is my number 1 running back. As great as Dalvin Cook and Derrick Henry were last season, I believe Alvin Kamara is the premier weapon out of the backfield. He's not close in rushing attempts or yards to those 2 guys, but he's pretty much uncoverable for linebackers, forcing a lot of teams to slide their nickel inside and leaving DBs on him flexed out. His efficiency last season on 270 touches was outstanding, turning 93 of those into first downs, leading the league with 21 total touchdowns, and averaging 9.1 yards per reception, despite everybody knowing where the ball was going to go when Drew Brees was in there. More of a game wrecker on the defensive side of the ball is the Colts' big addition from last offseason, DeForest Buckner, who was an all-pro level defensive tackle in San Francisco, and he only got better when coming to Indy. He came up half a sack short of double digits, and was right there in terms of tackles for loss, but it's the place where he doesn't get on the stat sheet that might be even more impressive, forcing the running back to redirect as he shoots into the backfield, occupying 2 blockers, or making the quarterback uncomfortable with one of his linemen on his lap. Just watch that second Titans game from last season, and see what Derrick Henry did to them without Defoe. At 16 with Minkah Fitzpatrick, there's probably about 4 or 5 safeties who you can argue being worthy of sitting atop the list, but I really don't understand why people don't want to fully give Minkah the credit that he deserves. He has become the premier playmaker on the back end in my opinion, and the numbers back it up. Over these last 2 years, he's intercepted 9 passes, scored of 2 of those, and deflected another 20 passes. The goal have come up with 4 loose balls himself. He's so smart and instinctual, trusting what his eyes tell him, and has the range to make up for some deficiencies at the cornerback position. The guy who really emerged out there at the corner last season is somebody who I loved as a college prospect, and has gotten better every year in the league, in Jair Alexander of the Packers. He has earned the tag of being a true shutdown corner, with his ability to match up against number 1s from the opposing team on a weekly basis. He may only have 4 interceptions in 3 years, but he also has 41 passes broken up, and when nobody in the Packers defense seemingly made plays in the NFC Championship game, it was Jair coming up with 2 big picks off Brady. He was also PFF's number 1 ranked corner last season. At 14 with Fred Warner, sure, Bobby Wagner is still up there, and Darius Leonard can fill the stat sheet like few others, but I believe Fred Warner is the best linebacker in the game today. His ability to see things develop and get there in a hurry is on a different level, whether it's beating blockers to the spot in the run or screen game, but even more so, it's his ability and what he allows his defense to do in coverage, being able to carry the inside receiver down the seams, feel crosses behind him, and get underneath those passes that would usually create issues for the team. Next up we have Stephon Diggs, and this was one of the best calls in fantasy football and in general for me. As I said, Stephon Diggs would be even better than the perennial 1,000-yard receiver that we saw in Minnesota. In year 1 with Josh Allen, they created some sweet music together, as Diggs caught more passes for more yards than any other player in the league, whether it's shaking DBs out of their boots off the line, winning with ball tracking downfield, working the sideline, or running a slalom around defenses. He was a problem last season. His 82.6% success rate versus man coverage towers above the rest of the league. And at number 12, Tyreek Hill. Tyreek quickly turned himself into one of the most lethal weapons in the league as a runner, receiver, and returner. However, too many people probably still don't realize how much he has improved as an overall receiver, working meticulously on his route running, being much more of a physical player than he gets credit for, as somebody who can win with the ball hanging up in the air, while having the ability to run circles around defenders with the ball in his hands. Just compare what the Bucs did to him in the Super Bowl, doubling him on basically every single snap, compared to when Tyreek haunted Carlton Davis in the regular season matchup, when he thought he could leave him one-on-one out there. And then the final name of this group, TJ Watt. As great as Aaron Donald has been, and how great he was again last season, I believe TJ should have been voted Defensive Player of the Year. He led the league with 23 tackles for loss, 15 sacks, and 61 total pressures. This guy goes hard on every single snap, he's great with his hands, and he gets better throughout games, as he reads the sets of offensive tackles. And as great as he has been as a pass rusher, and how the Steelers move him around on the front on longer downs, he does drop into coverage a fair amount to take away some additional opportunities. Today, he's on a completely different tier than his older brother. And with that, we enter the top 10, starting things off with Myles Garrett. We've been blessed with so many freakishly talented edge defenders coming out of college in recent years, that I don't think people fully appreciate Myles Garrett because his physical potential is just through the roof. He came into the league as a super explosive and strong, yet very unrefined defensive end with like 2 pass rush moves. He's gotten even bigger, much better at rushing with a plan and stringing moves together, and somehow he's become so much more flexible, I think, which I thought his biggest weakness coming out of college was some stiffness in his body. Last season, if not for getting a little banged up and missing a couple of games, he could have been right there in the running for Defensive Player of the Year. He still collected 12 sacks, 10 tackles for loss, 4 forced fumbles, and just terrorized some opponents. Next, we have back-to-back tight ends, which it's really head-to-head between these two. I'll explain my reasoning in a second, but George Kittle deserves to be up there, even after missing half of last season. This guy's an elite run blocker who takes a lot of joy and pride to contribute in those plays, and he's as dangerous as it gets off play action, working on deep crossers and corner routes. Yet, when you do detach him from the line and have him matched up with safeties one-on-one, he can take them to school as well. What separates him from a lot of those other classic wide tight ends, though, is how much of a threat he is after the catch, running away or through defenders. However, looking at what they have done most lately, the crown here has to go to Travis Kelce, who just set the NFL record for tight ends with 5 straight 1,000-yard seasons. This year he set personal bests, as his 1,416 receiving yards was second in the league only to Stephon Diggs, and he led all players in receiving first downs with 79 of those. The way that he can set up defense with head fakes, change up his footwork on the fly, and find ways to create throwing windows is just brilliant. On third downs, this is where Patrick Mahomes is looking, as well as when things break down, and he needs somebody to get open for him. And Kelce comes up with those big catches time and time again. I don't think anybody presents more of a matchup problem than this guy in the pass game. At 7, we have Quentin Nelson, the best guard and overall offensive lineman in the NFL today. Nelson has put together a first ballot Hall of Fame resume already early on. He has been a first-team All-Pro in each of his first 3 years in the NFL. He has great power at the point of attack, is an absolute freight train to get out in front of as a puller or on screens. His wrestling background really shows up in his sturdy base as a pass protector, and he's just very sound already technically for such a young player. Unfortunately, he apparently just suffered an injury similar to his quarterback, Carson Wentz, that will sideline him for 5 to 12 weeks, which the news of that came out just after I finalized this list, but he's somebody who has a chance to be an all-timer. Next up, we have somebody who has shown dramatic improvement in each of his last 2 years, in Josh Allen. In 2019, I already thought some of those rifles he threw and plays that he made off script are phenomenal, but last season his fundamentals in terms of footwork and release points, while erasing most of those head-scratching type of plays that we had seen from him in the past, he could have easily been the league's MVP in many other seasons, throwing 37 touchdowns compared to 10 interceptions, plus 8 more TDs on the ground. You see him grow in terms of recognizing blitzes and exposing weaknesses defensively, as well as turning some of those pressures into big plays on their end, with his ability to extend plays. Plus he's a real weapon in the red zone, as his 25 rushing touchdowns ranked first among quarterbacks and near the top in the league altogether. Moving us to the top 5, and guys that no doubt will receive a 99 rating from me, starting with Jalen Ramsey, who's the premier shutdown corner in the league today. He is so aggressive, has the speed to run with pretty much anybody down the sideline, can take away one side of the field or completely take out the top receiver, like he did twice against the physical freak in the Seahawks DK Metcalf. He allows the Rams defense to do so many different things in terms of zoning away from him, leaving him on an island when they bring pressure, to not give the quarterback easy outs, going to his ex-receiver. His fellow cornerback on the other side, Darius Williams, benefited from it by seeing a lot of targets come his way, while being able to have his eyes in the backfield and produce turnovers, which he does deserve a lot of credit for, but I think Ramsey is almost in a tier of his own, with those other 3 corners in the top 25 slightly behind him. And what I love about him as well is his physicality as a tackler, where he doesn't shy away from anybody coming out to him. But just ahead of him, we have somebody who had a little bit of trouble covering, even though the offensive scheme definitely helped in that regard, and it was made tough for him, in Davante Adams of the Packers. And I really believe Davante put himself at the top of the wide receiver food chain last season, as he was tied for second in the league with 115 catches, turning 73 of those into first downs, and easily leading all pass catchers with 18 touchdowns, despite missing a couple of games. His release package off the line is unmatched. He does a great job of selling routes and getting defenders turned the wrong way. His back shoulder combination with Aaron Rodgers is clearly the best league-wide, and just overall their connection, picking up those little details to expose defensive weaknesses, And he may not be the fastest guy, but he always manages to stack his corner on vertical routes to open up an opportunity for the ball to arrive, and he's very efficient after the catch, and I want to say that in a good way. The highest ranked non-quarterback here is Aaron Donald, and this dude has just been putting together a resume of the best defensive tackle and one of the greatest defensive players overall in NFL history. His numbers as an interior defensive lineman are in a class of their own, and he's so much better than any of those will ever tell you. While I thought there were a couple of other worthy candidates, he just took home his third Defensive Player of the Year trophy, tying Lawrence Taylor and J.J. Watt for the most ever. He's too strong to run at, he's too quick to run away from, he's too good with linking his hands and hips together if you try to sit on his bull rush, but when you do back off and shift further onto your heels, he will take you for a ride. He's as close to unblockable as anybody I've watched in the last 15 years, maybe with prime JJ just on his heels. And finishing with silver here, we have the league MVP Aaron Rodgers, who led the NFL in completion percentage, touchdowns, touchdown to interception ratio, passer rating, and QBR. So basically every meaningful statistic for the position. People will call it bounce back season, and I'd agree to some degree here in terms of being one of the top 3 players in the league, but he already started as a top 5 quarterback from last season. Sure, the difference in numbers is quite large, but you go back to 2019 and just watch how many missed opportunities there were because of drops by his receivers or those guys not adjusting their routes appropriately. I thought Rodgers looked stronger last season, and he was less casual with flipping passes out there purely with his arm. But if it wasn't for the guy just ahead of him, he would have been in the conversation for the league's number 1 guy in all but maybe 1 or 2 seasons of the last decade. And I'm telling you, if he and Tom Brady had swapped teams in the NFC title game, it would have been a blowout, and Rodgers would have a 2nd ring by now. But only one guy can be number 1, and that is Patrick Mahomes. What is there really still to say here? Mahomes has now started his career with an MVP, a Super Bowl MVP, and another appearance in the big game in his first 3 years in the league. Don't take his greatness for granted. We have never quite seen somebody like him in terms of the arm talent, the flexibility, the feel for bodies around him, and how to extend plays, and just the sheer playmaking ability that he has. Now I believe we have seen him improve from the shoulders up, looking at how he was dicing up blitzes last season, his mental capacity to picture secondary plays, it's all unreal. Sure, he still makes some mistakes every once in a while, when he drifts too deep in the pocket, or tries some impossible throws, but he more than makes up for it every single time it seems like. And he's had poor protection in quite a few games these last 2 years, but somehow makes us forget about them. He has a chance to become the greatest of all time, even if he doesn't win 7 rings like Tom, because just like Rodgers, he's looking like a fixture for number 1 on this list for years to come, as nobody can quite change a game like him. And that finally wraps up the list. Starting to get out of breath here a little bit. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this breakdown, I would really appreciate if you could leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and share it with a couple of friends. This took a long time to put together, so please leave a like if you enjoyed the list. Let me know what you would change in the comments. I'm always up for discussions. There's really not much to say here anymore, especially after taking a couple of hours just to record this. I will be back next week with my preseason NFL power rankings. I have my fantasy diamonds list coming out after that, predictions on the entire NFL season, and then it's time to kick off the year. Let's get hyped for this thing. So until then, see you later. Peace!